In Matsalu National Park, on Estonia's western coast, sits a wide, shallow lagoon connected to the Baltic Sea by a single narrow crossing. For roughly 2 centuries, that crossing was just a road, built across the water so people in carts could pass between the mainland and the coast. In more recent years, Estonian conservationists rebuilt that same crossing into something else entirely. A dam fitted with adjustable water regulators, opened and closed on a careful seasonal schedule to control exactly when the lagoon's water connects to the open sea. The purpose has nothing to do with traffic. It has to do with keeping one of the Baltic Sea's most important predatory fish alive long enough to grow up. Before we get into how that happened, if you're into real, deeply researched nature stories like this one, hit like, drop a comment, and subscribe now so you don't miss the next one. Northern pike are one of the Baltic Sea's most ecologically important predators, sitting near the top of the coastal food web and playing an outsized role in keeping smaller fish populations in balance. Since the 1990s, pike numbers have declined sharply across most of the Baltic region, a trend researchers studying decades of fisheries and monitoring data have linked to a combination of eutrophication, the construction of piers, marinas, and coastal development that degrades shallow spawning habitat, and the draining of the wetlands and coastal streams pike depend on to reproduce successfully. A large, multi-country analysis, pulling together 59 separate time series of pike data from 8 nations bordering the Baltic, found negative population trends across most of the region, with declines in some areas ranging as high as 100% of the local population disappearing entirely. The forces driving pike declines across most of the rest of the Baltic reveal exactly what Estonia's wetland-based approach was designed to counteract. Eutrophication, the excessive buildup of nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus in coastal water, largely from agricultural runoff and wastewater, fuels algal blooms that cloud the water and starve underwater vegetation of the sunlight pike fry need for cover and hunting habitat. Coastal development compounds the problem directly with the construction of piers, marinas, and shoreline infrastructure, documented as measurably degrading exactly the shallow vegetated spawning habitat pike depend on, while the systematic draining and straightening of the smaller coastal streams and wetlands pike historically used for spawning eliminated nursery habitat entirely in many parts of the region during the 20th century's push toward agricultural land conversion. Estonia's comparatively lower level of industrial coastal development, combined with deliberate, sustained wetland restoration efforts like Matsalu's, left the country with more of this critical habitat intact or recoverable than many of its neighbors around the Baltic. Estonia stood out from that pattern in a striking way. The same regional analysis found that of every country studied around the Baltic, only Estonia and northern Finland showed positive trends in coastal pike populations, bucking a decline that had proven consistent almost everywhere else. Understanding why required looking closely at how and where pike actually reproduce. Northern pike are a genuinely formidable predator, and understanding their basic biology helps explain why losing them from a stretch of coastline matters so much to the wider ecosystem. An adult pike's jaw carries roughly 700 teeth, angled backward to grip slippery prey and prevent escape once caught, and females grow substantially larger than males, with the biggest individuals in the Baltic region regularly exceeding 10 kilograms and occasionally surpassing 20. As an ambush predator sitting near the top of the coastal food chain, pike play an outsized role in controlling populations of smaller fish species, and their presence or absence can ripple through an entire coastal ecosystem's balance. Unusually for a predator this size, pike also tolerate a wide range of salinity, capable of successful reproduction in water with salt concentrations up to roughly 8.5 practical salinity units, which is part of what allows them to move between fully freshwater spawning habitat and the considerably saltier open Baltic Sea over the course of their lives. Unlike many marine fish, northern pike in the Baltic rely heavily on freshwater and brackish wetland habitat to spawn successfully, seeking out shallow vegetated coastal bays, lagoons, and streams where their eggs and newly hatched fry can develop away from the open sea's stronger currents and larger predators. Research tracking the origins of coastal pike populations found that roughly 82% of pike along the Estonian coast recruit from freshwater spawning areas, one of the highest such proportions recorded anywhere in the Baltic region, a figure that made protecting and restoring exactly this kind of habitat an unusually high-leverage conservation strategy for the country. Matsalu's restored lagoon system works by giving young pike precisely the protected, controlled environment that stretch of coastline had been slowly losing. Each spring, adult pike move into the shallow, vegetated lagoon to spawn, taking advantage of the warmer, calmer water and dense underwater plant growth that make it an ideal nursery. The water regulators built into the old road crossing allow park managers to keep the lagoon closed off from the sea during the fry's most vulnerable early weeks, giving the next generation room to grow to a size where they can actually survive the open Baltic without also cutting the local cattle farmers and wading birds that depend on the same water levels off from the resources they need. Once the young pike have grown large enough, the regulators are opened, and that cohort disperses out through the old crossing and into the Baltic Sea itself. Scientists studying this kind of wetland-based pike nursery across the wider Baltic region have found that the approach works considerably better than early skeptics expected. A study using rod and reel survey fishing across paired coastal bays, some adjacent to a restored wetland and some without one nearby, found that adult pike abundance ran on average 90% higher in bays situated next to a restored wetland system compared to similar bays without one. To confirm those wetland-raised fish were actually the source of the difference rather than simple coincidence, researchers tagged captured pike with small electronic identification tags and installed reader stations at wetland inlets, tracking individual fish movement directly. The data confirmed that pike originating from restored wetlands made up a substantial share of the adult pike found in the surrounding coastal habitat, with some tagged fish detected dispersing as far as 10 kilometers from the wetland where they had hatched. Matsalu's significance extends well beyond its role as a pike nursery. The wider national park, established in 1957 and recognized internationally as a Ramsar wetland of global importance since 1994, sits directly on the East Atlantic Flyway and hosts more than 2 million migrating waterfowl each spring, including the majority of the world's Buick's swan population passing through on their annual migration. That international ecological significance is part of why restoring the site's pike nursery required such careful, multi-species balancing rather than a simpler, single-purpose engineering fix. Any change to how water moves through the lagoon system had the potential to affect the wading birds, waterfowl, and amphibians that depend on the same wetland for entirely different reasons than the pike do, making Matsalu's water regulator system as much an exercise in reconciling competing ecological needs as it is a piece of fisheries infrastructure. Matsalu is far from the only site in Estonia built around this principle, but it stands as one of the country's most carefully engineered examples, precisely because of the delicate balancing act its water regulator system has to manage. The lagoon serves multiple, sometimes competing purposes at once: nursery habitat for pike, grazing water access for cattle kept on the surrounding coastal meadows, nesting habitat for wading birds that need consistently moist ground, and breeding habitat for amphibians including the natterjack toad, a species of particular conservation concern in the region. Park managers monitor water levels and species needs continuously throughout the season, adjusting when the regulators open and close based on which species requirements take priority at any given moment, a level of hands-on management considerably more involved than simply leaving a wetland alone to recover on its own. Restoring the Matsalu crossing itself required navigating a genuinely difficult set of competing institutional interests before any physical work could even begin. The Estonian Fund for Nature, the organization that led the restoration effort, spent roughly 2 years in meetings with the country's Environmental Board, Agricultural Board, and State Forestry Service before securing agreement on how the project should proceed, a reflection of just how many different government bodies and land use priorities intersected at a single narrow crossing of water. That extended negotiation ultimately shaped several of the project's key technical decisions, including the choice to preserve the crossing as a natural, unpaved dam, rather than replacing it with poured concrete, a compromise that satisfied concerns about the site's historical character while still delivering the water management flexibility the pike restoration work required. Climate change has added a new layer of difficulty to that balancing act in recent years. Milder winters bringing less snow have reduced how much water accumulates in the lagoon by early spring, a change park managers have had to actively account for in how they manage the regulators, since a shallower spring lagoon offers less protected space for that year's spawning pike than the system was originally designed around. Estonian conservationists rebuilt the crossing's dam mechanism specifically to address this evolving challenge, opting to preserve the old road's natural, unpaved form rather than replace it with poured concrete, a choice made partly to protect the site's cultural and historical character and partly because it proved better suited to the kind of flexible, adjustable water management the changing climate now demands. Estonia's approach has also directly informed similar restoration work elsewhere around the Baltic, most notably in Sweden, where researchers and conservation groups have constructed and studied dozens of comparable pike wetlands along the country's own coastline over the past 2 decades. Projects supported by organizations including Baltic Sea 2020 have specifically investigated whether artificially constructed or restored pike wetlands measurably strengthen coastal fish stocks, building directly on the same underlying premise driving Matsalu's water regulator system, that protecting or recreating safe freshwater-adjacent spawning habitat can meaningfully offset losses occurring elsewhere along an increasingly developed coastline. The consistency of results across these different national efforts, positive population trends specifically clustered in the areas with the most intact or restored spawning wetlands, has strengthened the broader scientific case that this single intervention, protecting the right kind of shallow vegetated coastal water, may be one of the most effective tools available anywhere in the Baltic for reversing a decades-long predatory fish decline. Genetic research on Baltic pike populations has revealed another layer of complexity that makes protecting sites like Matsalu even more consequential than a simple headcount of fish might suggest. Studies tracking pike genetics across small geographic scales in the coastal Baltic have found that individual spawning populations display natal homing behavior, meaning pike tend to return to the same specific bay, lagoon, or stream where they themselves hatched in order to spawn, generation after generation, rather than mixing freely with pike from other nearby spawning sites. That homing behavior, combined with generally limited dispersal between distinct spawning populations, has allowed genetically distinct local pike populations to persist at a remarkably fine geographic scale along the Baltic coast, each one adapted in subtle ways to its own specific spawning habitat. Researchers studying this pattern have concluded that conservation and restoration efforts should actively work to preserve these genetic differences between populations rather than inadvertently homogenizing them, a finding that reinforces why restoring a specific historic spawning site like Matsalu, rather than simply stocking generic hatchery-raised pike into any convenient stretch of coastline, matters so much for the long-term genetic health of the wider Baltic pike population. The broader pattern documented across Estonia's coast carries real significance for how the rest of the Baltic region has begun approaching pike conservation. Researchers in reviewing habitat restoration measures across the entire Baltic Sea concluded that protecting and restoring exactly this kind of coastal wetland and freshwater spawning habitat has stronger scientific support behind it than almost any other intervention tested, more effective generally than fishing regulations alone at actually reversing a declining pike population. Estonia's coastal wetlands, including the Matsalu system and comparable restoration sites elsewhere along the country's coastline, have become reference points cited directly in that broader research, offering measurable, tagged, tracked evidence that a well-managed lagoon can genuinely refill a stretch of open sea with a keystone predator, one carefully timed gate opening at a time. The stickleback complication documented elsewhere in the Baltic offers a useful contrast to Estonia's relatively positive pike trends. Researchers examining 40 years of fish survey data along roughly 1,200 kilometers of the Baltic's western coastline found that the three-spined stickleback, a fish no larger than a minnow, had grown so abundant in many areas that it now actually outnumbers the very predators, pike and perch among them, that would normally keep its population in check. Once pike and perch numbers drop low enough in a given area, juvenile sticklebacks that would ordinarily fall prey to them instead survive in large numbers, grow into adults that feed heavily on the eggs and larvae of pike and perch themselves, and effectively lock the ecosystem into a self-reinforcing cycle, working directly against the recovery of the larger predatory fish. That dynamic, formally described by researchers as a predator-prey reversal, illustrates exactly why simply hoping pike numbers might recover on their own has proven insufficient in many parts of the Baltic, and why active targeted habitat restoration, like the Matsalu lagoon system, plays such a critical role in giving pike populations enough of a foothold to break out of that cycle in the areas where restoration has actually been attempted. That reversal has proven remarkably persistent once established, since a coastline dominated by sticklebacks offers few opportunities for pike or perch populations to rebuild on their own, making deliberate intervention, rather than simple patience, the more realistic path back toward a healthier predator-dominated coastal ecosystem. If you enjoy real verified stories from the wild edges of nature, like this video, leave a comment letting me know what you thought and subscribe for more. I will see you in the next one.